Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited for this panel. My name is Megan Farnsworth. I'm the Director of Social Media over at Wired. And we have a really awesome panel lined up for you to talk about how people are dealing with breaking news, how third-party platforms are doing it, and we also want to hear from you. So we're hoping that we're not the only ones talking, that you guys will both share your concerns, what's happening in your newsrooms or your businesses, and even solutions that you may have. So we're going to have some presentations, and then we're going to open it up for a larger conversation. So think right now of what you want to share or tips you might have, or obviously questions for our amazing panelists. So just to get us started, I went on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and pulled some facts just to kind of get a sense of what we're dealing with here when it comes to breaking news. So according to Twitter, 500 million tweets are sent every day. And to break that down, that's about 5,787 tweets every second. Around 1.5 billion people use Facebook every day, and around 2.1 billion people use one of Facebook's products, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, or Messenger, every day on average. Finally, on YouTube, that's 1 billion hours of video are watched daily. And according to YouTube, on mobile alone, it reaches more 18 to 34-year-olds in the US than any TV network. So that's a lot of information going up that all of us in news have to look at, deal with, figure out what's true, what's not. And of course, for people who work in these industries or work on third-party platforms, how are they dealing with that? How are they contextualizing it, and what's true? So I'm really excited to introduce our panelists and have them come up here, and I'll stop talking. Just a quick introduction. First, we'll have Jimmy O'Keefe. He's the marketing manager for Today in Facebook. He leads product marketing for Facebook's product suite designed to help connect people with local news, community information, and conversations between neighbors. Next, we'll have Stephanie Federico. She's the digital news editor for KUT.org. She came to Austin a couple years ago from NPR in Washington, D.C., where she was the homepage and audience engagement editor. And finally, we'll have Corey Bergman. Corey is the co-founder and head of news and product at Factal, a startup that provides breaking news verification and geolocation services to a growing roster of the world's largest organizations. So I'm really excited. Please welcome our panelists, and we're going to start with Jimmy.
Hi, folks. Just give me a second to get set up here. All right. So, my name is Jimmy. Thanks for being here. I am the product marketing manager for Today In at Facebook, which means that I spend all of my time thinking about ways to help connect people to local news, community information, and the conversations between neighbors. And today what I wanted to touch on a little bit is some of the ways that we are connecting people to urgent local news and community information in times of crises or urgent situations or breaking news situations, what we're doing there, and then specifically what I wanted to touch on is why it's complicated. So reasons that will sound familiar to you, but probably a little different because it's coming from the platform perspective. So just kind of want to open the tent there, and in so doing, may end up getting in trouble later, but I'm from Kansas, and we tend to be a little bit of an open book, so it's a risk I'm willing to take. Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into all this with you. So if you've ever seen me talk before, I've shown this chart, which is 2 years old. The reason I'm showing it is because 2 years ago, we did a survey. We asked people, what is the type of news you want to see more of on Facebook? And what we heard from people around the world was that they wanted to see more local news, more so than any other type of news content. And actually, the reverse was also true. So, what is the type of news people wanted to see less of on Facebook? And it turns out local news is the least thing that people want to see less of on Facebook. So take a minute. Least, less of, double negative. Anyway, more local news. So, and we've seen this insight come through in a number of different ways over the course of the couple of years that have followed that. And in addition, it was, not only do people want to see more local news on Facebook, but what they wanted was a way to not have to rely on the serendipity of newsfeed to deliver it to them. So if they wanted to go and find like a discoverable, stable place for them to go and find out what's going on in their community, in their neighborhood, they could do that. So that's where we got the idea to create Today In, which I always talk about as a new place on Facebook for local news and community information. But at this point, it's not that new. Yesterday, we announced that we've expanded it to over 6,000 cities and towns in the US. But that does exclude some of the larger cities like New York and Chicago and Dallas and others. And that's just because of two real reasons. One is the technical complexity of trying to pull together all the information and hyper-localize it in the context of a really populous area. And it's also just about, we have research that suggests that demand for this information is actually potentially greatest in smaller to medium-sized cities. In any case, New Orleans is, fun fact, actually one of the first 6 cities that we launched in way back in the day. Come a long way since then. In any case, today as a part of it, we've created a couple of creator tools. So one for local news publishers called Local Breaking News Indicator, which I'll tell you about, and then one for first responders and local governments called Local Alerts. And really what we're trying to do, the North Star for us, is when there's an evolving situation happening in a community, we want to make it easier for people to find local news and community information that is trusted and authoritative. We've all seen how when something like this is happening in a community, an emergency, a crisis, or just a developing situation, misinformation does tend to spread on social media and local groups and on Facebook. And if we can find a way to elevate those voices that are trusted and authoritative and help them break that signal through from the noise, that's really what we're all about. So local breaking news. The way that it works, and this is something that we've been testing, but basically this is a real example. CBS 2 Boise is one of our 150 beta partners. This is a real example. So earlier this year there was a brush fire. They used at their discretion the breaking news indicator. And what happens when they do that is a couple of things. So the first is that we send a notification to their page followers, which means that it's that little red dot that shows up on your Facebook app. So that makes it a pretty powerful tool. The ability for news publishers to send a notification on Facebook directly to people who follow their page is not something we've done before, but it's something we've been experimenting with here. This middle screen here is what it would show up looking like in newsfeed. So you'll see that breaking news indicator on the link cover, and then it also shows up at the top of Today In for the period of time that's set by the publisher at their discretion, which means that everybody, let's say in Boise, would see it there for that duration of the time. So quickly just want to answer the question of what is the difference between local breaking news and local alerts, because a lot of people even internally at Facebook don't understand the difference. So really, they're tools that work in similar ways. They're both in a beta stage that we've been testing, but they have different audiences and different use cases. So local breaking news is for news publishers, local news publishers, many of whom are like yourself. And local alerts is for local governments and first responders. They work in similar ways, so they're available in newsfeed, notifications, and Today In. Local breaking news is a little bit earlier stage, so we have about 150 partners in the US. We're expanding at the beginning of next year. In local alerts, we have over 350 local government and first responder partners, and we're expanding nationally sort of at the end of this year. And the use cases are really different. So the breaking news use case is much more frequent. It's breaking news, so everything from crime and tragedy at the local level, hard news in politics, inclement weather, finance, business, investigations, you name it. But local alerts is a little different. It's more about information that's pretty factual and not super nuanced, but may be important for people to know in order for them to stay safe or like take a specific action, like a road closure all the way up to like an active shooter or a hurricane, tornado, water main break, missing person, that kind of stuff. So we like to refer to that as sort of like the everyday emergency use case for local alerts. So that's a less frequent use case. And just to give you an example, I'm going to show you a video. You can sort of, it's a break in the monotony of me talking at you. So this is just a video showing how one of our partners has used local alerts, who's the County of Sonoma government, during a flood that happened earlier this year. So this is quick.
For as quiet and peaceful as it was, it's so violent. Everything gets ruined.
When something like this happens, we all come together. Everything else doesn't matter anymore.
This place became an island for 3 days.
The Russian River in Sonoma County is at its highest level since 1997.
It's kind of hard to imagine that water would just take over this place. My name is Melissa Hernandez. I work with the County of Sonoma. Our job is warning people and communicating to our residents when we have an emergency.
Spreading the message rapidly, that was everything.
Local alerts give your message the immediacy that you need. We don't have to go through an extensive protocol. We can communicate directly with our residents.
Because of the alerts, people were more prepared this time.
Anytime you get assistance or awareness, it's a gift.
We see how quickly they start sharing it. And within minutes, we know that the post has reached thousands of people.
The water was up to the fence lines.
Sound booth totally went underwater.
It was very surreal to lose everything.
We use local alerts also through the recovery process.
The only thing that's been keeping us going is the support of the community.
When you do have an event like this, you're there to help each other.
Our goal is to make as much money as we can so that we can get people back in their houses, get businesses back open.
A lot of people did lose properties, but at the end of the day, everybody got out with their lives.
And to have these tools, it's exciting because I know people are seeing it and people are actually taking action. We love living here and our roots are here. We're not gonna go anywhere and we're gonna stay here because this is where we love to be. We belong here.
So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of a flavor of how some of our partners are using these tools to help keep people in their communities safe, in the know, and informed. It's really important that in developing these products that we're creating a lot of value for our partners. So for local breaking news, I'm showing here an example of the Wausau Pilot and Review, which is an independent local news publisher in Wausau, Wisconsin. And what we hear from news publishers, including this one, is that local breaking news helps in a couple of ways. So the first is increased engagement, which obviously is increased referral traffic for news publishers. There's a second component, which is around boosting their reputation as a serious news organization, so there's an increase in credibility. And then finally, it's helping them protect their audiences. When they do break news first, they get a little bit more of the credit for that breaking news situation relative to some of their competitors. We hear similar feedback from first responder partners who use local alerts, except for them, it's really just about they're just looking for ways when they have an emergency in a situation for them to spread the message so that people see that information that in some cases might actually be life-saving. And we've also been running surveys. So we've been asking people on Facebook who've seen this type of information, and 80% told us that they found it valuable. 73% reported that it provided brand new information that they hadn't seen anywhere else. And then finally, 43% said that they took an action as a result of the information that they saw. So in some cases, that's that action. Like let's say there was a situation where there was a rash of car robberies, and people said that the action that they took was they went and locked their car. But in another situation where there was a missing person and we asked them about it, they said the action that they took was that they talked to their friends and family about it, or they just prayed that that person would sort of make it home safe and sound. Okay, so some of the reasons why this is complicated. And this is the stuff that literally keeps me up at night. It's the stuff that we're trying to think through. We don't necessarily have all the answers, but it's one of the reasons it takes so long for us to roll out these products, these new features to local news publishers and first responders. So the first is we want to give our partners total control. I like to talk about how I think that I always talk about how local journalists and first responders are my boss. My mission in life is to help elevate their information on Facebook and connect them with people who want that information. And it makes me incredibly proud to support their work. But at the same time, it's Facebook. So we have to ensure that it's a product that's creating value for people. It's giving them the information in the way they want to see it. And that's a really fine line to walk. And to sort of thread that needle, it takes a lot of testing and learning over time. And so that's one of the things that we're really always on the lookout for, is balancing the partner value and people value in equal measure. The second is, we want our partners to follow certain guidelines, but at the same time, we have to respect their editorial independence. And so that's a really tricky one too. An example of this is, when local news publishers mark a post as breaking news that is a national story, like the Mueller report or something about national politics, for instance. So that would then show up at the top of Today In, which is it's meant to be a space that's for local news. So how, is that an okay experience for people? That's not something we prefer to happen, but at the same time, it's really up to you. And then the third is we want to test and learn and iterate. We're not going to get it right the first time. There are changes we need to make along the way. But we want to also avoid unintended ecosystem consequences. We've learned our lesson before Like we want to test small, but we want to avoid creating competitive advantages in a market by giving somebody a tool and not somebody else. Or like with, if we wanted to change our approach halfway through, how do we not overly thrash partners around as we make changes to these experiences? Like this is not, thinking about Facebook is a small part of your roles. And so, we just want to make sure that we don't create a lot of confusion. We want to be fair and inclusive. We want to, any sort of authoritative, trusted news publisher should have access to these tools, whether or not we know them or whether or not they're a partner of ours or something like that. But we also, it's really important that we limit access to these products to trusted and authoritative sources so that we don't give it to somebody who's just going to wreak havoc in a community by publishing misinformation or something else. So what are the eligibility criteria that we would use? We want to scale nationally and globally. But we want to provide a high-touch experience for our partners. So like right now with 150, like they can pick up the phone and call me and be like, hey, this broke, like I have this feedback, what if you did it this way? But if we expand it more broadly, it's going to be a lot harder for us to like, give them the information that they need to know and that kind of thing. And then finally, it's a platform. We're just the connective tissue between you who do the important work and the people who need it. But at the same time, like we've learned over time, we have to have more of a point of view about our products, and we need to ensure that they're used for good, to help people, right? And so what do we do like in a situation where somebody were to unintentionally or intentionally publish misinformation using this tool? Like how would we respond to something like that? What would our response be? So anyway, these are just some of the complexities from the platform perspective that we're thinking through as we're kind of trying to expand some of these new features that are designed to help people connect with urgent breaking news. So hopefully that's interesting for you. And I think at this point we'll pass it on to our next presenter. Thank you.
I'm going to the right side. Hopefully this will work. Hello. Journalists are human. That is to say, we make mistakes. I have made plenty of mistakes. You are not expected to get, as journalists, you're not expected to get things right every single time. Your responsibility is not to get things right every single time. Good journalists, when they make a mistake, they recognize it, they admit it, and they do their best to correct it as soon as possible. As Megan said, I work at KUT. That's the NPR member station in Austin, Texas. Before that, I was at NPR for about a dozen years. Before that, I worked in newspapers. And my wake-up call kind of in breaking news came in 2011 when I sent an email alert to thousands and thousands of people letting them know that Gabby Giffords had died. It was a horrible day. There were two people working on the news desk, or the digital desk that day, me and another person, and we got information. We were watching the scene of this shooting down at this shopping center where she was speaking to constituents, and we were following that, and the news director in Phoenix, I think it was, told our newscast unit that she was killed. And then later, one of our correspondents confirmed that her congressional sources said that she was killed. So newscast went with it, and then we put it in a post. We published it, we put it on the homepage, and we emailed it out to all these people. We didn't have push alerts back then, but the problem was that neither of the sources were identified in our coverage, which is not good, and also neither of them had firsthand information. So we were quickly backtracking, but by that time, other news organizations had picked it up, and it was just all over the place, and it was a really bad day. So fast forward to just last month, and law enforcement would screw us again. I'm at KUT now, though. But the Austin Police Department tweets out that the pieces of the upper deck of this major highway that's going through 35, or the highway is 35, this major highway that's going through Austin is like falling onto the roadway below. It's a big deal. So we just saw this, we put it in a post, we published it, we tweeted about it, did all the socials with it, we did the push alert for it because this is a big deal, this is a major highway, the roads were closed, We needed to get it to people as soon as possible. We didn't call police beforehand and double check this. We didn't call TxDOT, which is the agency that maintains the roadway, to double check this. We just went with this because we thought people should know, like, this was a traffic nightmare. So this was after hours. Again, it was like with the Gabby Giffords thing, it was a Saturday. It was like skeleton crew. This was nighttime. We were all just talking to each other on Slack. And Andy, who's in the front row right here, he saw this, he put it on Slack, and we just got the ball rolling on it. And then as we're talking, we're like, if the upper deck is crumbling into the lower deck, why is the upper deck still open and the lower deck is the only thing closed? That doesn't seem quite right. So the Austin police eventually tweeted again, let us know that the upper deck is not falling and it is open. Their PIO was not responding to phone calls, which was great. TxDOT eventually got back to us and they said what had actually happened was that there was a car crash on the upper deck. It hit a bridge and the debris from that was what was falling onto the lower deck. So, lessons learned. But I'm not going to tell you about all the screw-ups that we've done. We've also done some really good things. We actually won an OJA last year for our coverage of these serial bombings in Austin. This was a period of time over a 3-week period when 3 people were killed in these bombings and several other people were wounded. It was really stressful, it was scary, it was intense. It all ended when the bomber blew himself up as police surrounded him on a highway. And we're also up for another, we're also up for another award this year for this very exciting situation in which flooding caused the water treatment plants in Austin to just be overloaded and people had to boil their water. So in these 2 situations, I think we got it right. One thing that really, really helped was that we were all in the office when this happened and we could communicate and we could check each other's guts. And I think that's a huge thing. We had our managing editor, he just like designated people to do certain things, like call these people, jump on this story. We had a designated Slack channel where we could talk about what was going on. And most importantly, I think, was we had this here's what we know document that we would only put verified information from trusted sources in and say, here's what we know, and then here's what we don't know, and here are the questions that we're still trying to find answers for. So it just helped that we were all in the building together and we could communicate and just and check each other's guts, like I said. So these lessons that I've learned over the past dozen years or so, they may seem really, really basic, but when you're in a breaking news situation, you may forget some of these things. And I think most importantly is just slow down. Like, talk about what's going on, talk to each other, check each other's guts, don't cause unnecessary harm or alarm. Like, are you gonna tell people that this woman had died? Are you gonna tell people that the highway is collapsing, that sort of thing? Check your sources, make sure you get information from people with firsthand knowledge. If you can't independently confirm something, reveal your sources and tell the public where you got that information. Put news in context. Acknowledge that the story is developing. We always have the story is developing line at the bottom of a story. Correct your mistakes on all channels. You may make a mistake on air, make sure you correct it on air. If you tell the people through Facebook, through Twitter, you need to go to all the different platforms where you reported the original story and go back and be transparent and fix that mistake. Don't leave the public hanging. Admit what you don't know. And then, like I said earlier, this internal document about here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here are the questions we're trying to answer. And that is it.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey. How many people remember breaking news? Okay, so breaking news, part of NBC News, before the Peacock was on the Twitter account. Stand by. So now we are Factual, a enterprise version of breaking news, and I will talk you through a little bit of the story to explain the difference between a consumer-facing product
and that was ad-based, and an enterprise product, which is SaaS-based, and how I think there's a lot of ways that we can use this methodology in news today. So at Breaking News, we were about what is breaking news to you, right? You as an individual, what's important to you? And in most cases, that's something that's close to you, that's by proximity or topics that you care about. And of course, the very, very big stories. Typically today, still breaking news is almost broadcast across everything. We wanted to be very super targeted about what was breaking news to you, but still have the big stuff come through. So we were growing very, very quickly, and we noticed that advertisers were not really happy about tapping into our quickly growing audience because they did not want BMW being next to a terror attack or an explosion or a fire, bad brand advertising. And so we had trouble getting advertising revenue, but we started doing user surveys to find out how people use breaking news. And we found this interesting metric that 20% of the audience used it primarily for work. And so we started to think, well, maybe there's an enterprise version that we can offer to these folks that use it in their organizations, and what's breaking news to your organization. However, tragedy struck, and NBC shut us down. So we cried for a bit. But the advantage was that we suddenly got to start from zero. And you don't get that chance very often, because whenever you have ideas inside a news organization, to try to do those ideas is very difficult because you're still being pulled by the master organization to do what you normally do. So Ben Tesh and I, we had this opportunity to ask ourselves, what jobs did we do for these organizations that use breaking news in an enterprise fashion, right? And here's my mandatory Clayton Christensen quote. Whenever I do presentations, I usually have at least one. Understanding the job for which customers hire a product or service helps innovators more accurately develop products that align with what customers are already trying to accomplish. Not what journalists want to accomplish, monetize what you already do, but make something that they will want to buy because it does something for them. It gets something done. It gives them value. And so what we found was there was several markets that used us in this way, but we wanted to start with corporate security. So this is fascinating. When you delve into a different industry, you learn a lot about it. And we've gone to, I just got back from the big security conference, which is a lot different than ONA. I'll just have to tell you that. A lot of white guys, and a lot of them are packing heat, which is a little bit weird. Now, corporate security wants to keep employees and customers safe and minimize disruptions to the organization and keep management in the know. And over the years, as big events have happened like Paris, they've spun up these analyst teams that are de facto newsrooms inside companies. This is separate from PR and comms. These are newsrooms of analysts that look at social media, use social media tools, try to find breaking news, try to figure out if it's real, try to figure out where it is, figure out if it's near any of their stuff, and if it is near something, do something about it. If there's an active shooter that's a block away down the street from one of your offices, then they would call that office, they still do this, and lock the office down, because the police, surprise, don't go around and tell everybody to lock down. It's very rare. Companies actually do it ahead of the police in many cases. And you can apply that to all sorts of scenarios, right? If you're traveling, or if it's an office in Nigeria, and there's so many different points of exposure. And so these analysts do all this manually, and they were using breaking news as a way to find out what was real. And so, oh, ding, ding, ding. So let's make a product. We'll call it Factual, and it looks a lot like breaking news. If you remember the old breakingnews.com, however, it has all these enterprise features, still linking to original sources, still extremely fast, signal detection platform in the background, full soup to nuts, 35 languages, and then a 24/7 newsroom going through signal detection, determining what's breaking around the world, verifying it, specifically geolocating it. Now, we could have stopped there, but we've also done proximity analysis. If you're a company, you can upload 10,000 plus locations, 20,000 locations into the platform, and when anything happens within any distance that you specify, you're notified. So if you have a bunch of stores and there's an active shooter 100 meters away, you get the notification right out of the gate. And so that helps them to be able to automate a lot of that process that they had to do manually before and respond faster to help protect people from harm. So detection, verification, geolocation, if we had stopped there, Factual would be a content subscription. But we didn't. We did proximity analysis, workflow, emails that go to different people in the organization. How do they need to know? Collaboration tools to get people to work together on top of it. That turned Factal into a technology service. People are more likely to pay for services than news subscriptions. Technology services solve problems for people and companies. And so we went from being maybe $100 a month to being substantially higher. And people are buying, companies, big companies. So another way to look at this is, think of weather and traffic. Over the years, weather and traffic, if you wanted to know the weather and traffic, you went to news organizations to find that out. Now, with the exception of big breaking news about weather and traffic, you don't. You go to your app, your native app on your phone. Even if it's weather.com, it's now owned by IBM, which is a data company that bought weather.com specifically for that data capability. You can get it by asking Alexa and Google, whoever else, directly from NOAA, Dark Sky. Traffic, you use, of course, maps and Waze. And Uber and Lyft is kind of a navigation service as well when you think about it. So each of those, similar to what Jimmy just talked about being local, all are focused on solving local problems, right? So when you don't just think about, oh, I need to go get the weather. No, you're thinking about what I should do and where I should go and what I should wear. For traffic, you're trying to think of what's the easiest, fastest way I can get somewhere and what time do I have to leave? Well, these questions are answered increasingly by these services that exist. They go beyond just content. They provide a service. So the same thing is happening in breaking news, and this is what everyone should keep an eye on. Of course, we just saw what Facebook talked about, and the other platforms have different variations of their own services. They're pushing more into local and into notifications, right? Allowing government more distribution directly so agencies be able to contact people. Used to be if the police department needed to tell the public, they would tell the media, and the media would tell the public. Now, increasingly, they can just do it directly. And then you have this new crop or semi-new crop of companies like Nextdoor, right, that is doing local neighborhood-based breaking news. They do a fair amount of it. Ring, the Neighbors app, you don't have to have Ring to have the Neighbors app. It's an app you can just go get, draw a little line around your neighborhood right there, and get breaking news notifications. Not only is it people seeing, getting freaked out about some weird person in front of the house and sending that kind of crap out, but it's also, now they've hired a news team to look for crime and take crime data and actually turn it into notifications. You have the Citizen app, right, what's breaking news near me, and now you have all the aggregators that are out there too. So these are all, again, solving local problems. And if you're thinking from breaking news perspective, is how do I stay safe? How do I keep my family safe? How will I avoid any disruptions? Will this screw up my commute? How will this change my plans? How does this impact my property, my investments? And it's all really about that way of solving problems. So what I'm trying to hopefully get across today is that think about technology and journalism together as a service and start with the problems the jobs that need to be done. And it's interesting how we try to just basically tack business models onto things. And that's what we were trying to do at Breaking News, was to try to figure out how to tack a business model onto it. But when we got to start from scratch and really delve into an industry and spend a year talking to companies and going to all these conferences and reading all their industry newsletters and make something that solved problems for them, while still doing the best journalism that we can possibly do, that is turning into be a successful business. So I hope that can be helpful, and thank you very much.
Hopefully this is on. Yes. Thank you guys all for that. So we're going to open it up for questions. I'm going to start it off, but we have a wonderful woman right there in the yellow shirt who has a mic. So just raise your hand and we'll get over to you. But I'll start it off, and I'm really hoping that people can share some of their experiences, especially if you're in the news around breaking news and how you're using either curation or verification. If you're using Facebook's tools, we would really love to hear from you, because obviously these are 3 examples of what's happening. But I'm going to start off right now, and Jimmy, I wanted to go back to you, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see, we have 2 different kinds of the breaking news. We have it for governments and we have it for news. And I was just wondering how Facebook sees those 2 different kinds. You talked a little bit about the challenges of if somebody pushes out not fake news, I won't say fake news, false information, or Stephanie gave an example of the police department tweeting something that was kind of confusing. How does Facebook view itself in terms of either verifying, or if somebody keeps doing something wrong, would you take something away?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I feel like I'm at the UN. So a couple questions here. I think really important question. So here's how we see it. when there's an urgent situation, a crisis, an emergency, a breaking news situation that's unfolding in a community, it's really important that we help provide and elevate the trusted sources of information and help those voices cut through the noise. Because we also know that when we amplify those voices, we can stop the spread of misinformation at a local level in its tracks. So we think, there are two different tools here. So local breaking news, local alerts, and they're for news publishers and first responders, governments. We think that we've seen them used in really just different use cases. Like they work in pretty much the same way, but the use cases are entirely different, and we don't really see much overlap. So on the breaking news on the one hand is like it tends to be pretty nuanced, thoughtful, investigative, reporting on real issues. Which is obviously what journalism is meant to do. Whereas for local alerts, it tends to be a much more infrequent use case, which is all around like if there's urgent situation that people need to know because it's about public safety and may actually be life-saving, then that's when they use it. So it's much more factual. It's much less nuanced. It's like, there's a car crash or there's a fire or something like, missing person. So we think there's a world in which these two tools can peacefully coexist to help, the different trusted sources of information in the community help provide that information to people who need it. And so that's what we're trying to do. To your second point around like, so what happens, the old worst case scenario?
Always go to the worst case.
Always go to the worst case.
Not the best case, the worst case.
Spent a lot of time imagining what that might look like. What we've learned over the course of our testing is that by far, the most important thing is to make sure that when we provide access to these powerful tools, to news publishers as well as to governments, that we're providing them, the people who we give access to are who they say they are. They're not a bad actor. They don't have malicious intentions. And we also ask our partners to, we basically make their pages hack-proof by enabling them to go through, jump through a bunch of additional security hoops, which are a huge pain, but are important to, safeguard the integrity of their accounts. But there might be a situation where they unintentionally publish misinformation. And I don't think we've solved that problem. We watch it, we review all of the local alerts and local breaking news notifications that are sent. Ultimately, in a situation where somebody did get it wrong, it would be on that person to go ahead and correct that information, probably using another notification. But yeah, that's one of the reasons that we've been testing it and have been rolling it out slowly, because we just want to watch to see, is this something that we really have to be worried about? Do we see abuse of these tools? And we haven't really seen it at all. So it's, it makes us feel much better about these tools being used for good on balance to help people. And so that's sort of how we think about it. But yeah, like I say, we do review all of them. And we're watching like a hawk to make sure that there is no abuse happening. And if there was, of course, we would take the access away. Yeah. But we haven't seen an example of that yet. So that says something.
That's good. And Stephanie, for you, I'm super interested. I think everyone in here as a journalist has made some kind of mistake when it comes to breaking news. And so, but I guess the question is how we fix it in terms of how we're looking at things. And so the examples that you gave with NPR, there was a weekend crew, the KUT, it was after hours, so much news I feel like is happening now, not when we're fully staffed or there's a person on the news desk during the weekend. And so I guess two parts, did anything happen after that? Were there changes made to either staff up during those times or just the process? And it's just, what do you feel like we can do about that? Because I think that is something at least I relate a lot to, and I bet a lot of people here, of just the amount of information that's coming when we would like to be watching movies or doing something else and we have a skeleton crew.
Yeah, definitely at NPR they staffed up.
They staffed up.
Yeah, that was we need to be 24/7. We need to have the go-to managing editor you can call at any time and make these, It's weird because when I was there, the digital desk was just lowly little digital desk, and it's completely changed, and they've recognized it's not just Morning Edition and All Things Considered, it's throughout the day. It's a 24/7 process, and so yeah, that made this mess up made it really we need to recognize that there are times when there need to be senior editors and senior people available to talk through these things. So yeah.
And what was different when the two examples you gave of what worked with the bombings? What changed? I mean, I know it was during the day, so it's fully staffed, but is that literally the difference?
I mean, it's just like the luck.
Yeah.
It's just like, I think, you can communicate across Slack all the time, but I think just actually being together in the same room makes a huge difference. And just being like, okay, what do you think? What do you think is really going on? What do you think? What stories should we cover? What angles should we cover? Who should we reach out to? Oh, okay, you're reaching out to this person, and I'm going to reach out to this person. I mean, that happens on Slack, and I think we're getting better at that. But there's something to be said about in person.
Yeah. And how much were you looking at social during that time? Like, was it Facebook, Twitter? Like, what was all of it? Yeah. That's interesting. Again, does anyone have any questions for it? I'm going to keep. Oh, in the back. Oh, great. I'll stop talking. So the gentleman right here raised his hand first, and then there was a woman right there. Raise your hand. She'll be second. Awesome. And just say your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Alex Johnson from NBC News. One of the things I'm interested in when you're talking about verifying the location of an event, especially if it's in a remote location, is how do you account for and perhaps correct for technology that redirects location, for specifically VPNs, which are actually now being baked right into Opera and other browsers, but there's also geolocation spoofing software. How do you deal with that?
Is that Corey, maybe can I push that to you?
So, actually we use VPN sometimes to access content ourselves. We don't look at the location of necessarily where something is posted. We're triangulating multiple posts on what they're saying and proactively going out and even jumping in satellite, the street view, and looking at photos of signs and all that kind of good stuff. So technology can only take it so far, and our signal detection platform makes a guess at it, and then we have journalists that actually take it that last mile. So it's until there's magical technology, I think that's been the best approach.
Is there anything Facebook is doing? Does that really apply to you guys right now in terms of, because you're verifying pages, so it's not really something you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that question applies as much to us. Like for us, we know where, what we're doing is providing tools for news publishers and for first responders. And so, if they break news, we're going to assume that it's relevant to that specific community that they're based in. But for Today In, one thing that we do is we have 6,000 cities. We show 10 stories at a given time there. And the way we identify those stories, they're on Facebook. They've been posted to Facebook. And the way we identify those stories is through the audience affinity. So basically, where if people living in a city are much more likely to be reading an article than people living, on average in the U.S., then we're going to assume that article might be relevant to that city. So that's sort of one of the ways that we hyper-localize. We figure out which articles from which local news publishers are relevant at a given point in time, and that's how we identify which news articles we're going to show in a given city. We do that all using algorithms, not human curation. So we're getting better at that. It's not perfect for sure, but that's sort of one of the ways that we think about location.
There, question right there. Yeah, stand up.
Hi, I'm Pat. I'm from the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Oh, can you say that again? We just couldn't quite hear you.
Pat from the Philadelphia Inquirer. This question's for Jimmy about Facebook. And the tools that you talked about seem really great for sharing the story once you have it. But my question is about news gathering. I used to use Facebook Signal a lot in finding sources, like when breaking news was happening. And then I logged on one day and it was just gone. So just wondering if there's anything for finding sources, because right now I'm pretty limited to just Twitter.
Such a good question.
Such a good question. I was wondering if somebody was going to ask me that question.
I know, that's on my list.
So the Signal, the example that you mentioned is one of the when I talked about how when we're testing and learning and iterating, we have learned that we need to not be thrashing our partners around because of situations like that, where we launch something and then, whatever reason, change of approach and then you shut it down. That's not a good experience. We want to prevent that from happening in the future. We've learned the hard lessons the hard way in many cases. In terms of building new, I am all about building new, if we can find new tools that we can build to help journalists do their job, especially local journalists, Like I would love it if we could do something like that. Like we don't have, there's nothing on my radar that we're doing specifically to help like enhance your ability to news gather on the platform. But I would love, I mean, if you have any ideas or things that would be really helpful, like we should talk after or we can talk now. But like I love that idea, and I wish, you know, I think I'm all ears. We don't have anything sort of that we're actively working on to help news gathering on the platform, like any new tools for journalists that I know of. But yeah, but there's always, of course, there's CrowdTangle, which is a great way to of course, gather, you know, do news gathering. But in terms of new tools that we're developing, nothing comes to mind. But let's talk after, and we can get some ideas going.
Yes, gentlemen here, just say your name and where you're from.
I'm Jeff Noack with NOAA.com, the Times-Picayune. This is probably best for Stephanie, because you mentioned how you had the overpass, you know, misinformation go out. Yeah. Do you have any tips or suggestions or like any ideas of what's worked for you in terms of verifying social media information from law enforcement sources that seem to be using that more and more and more as their first, if not only way of disseminating that information?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this situation, and I think, like, if I could go back in time, would I have done this again? Would we have done this again? Like, you see this tweet, and it's just like, it's from the police, and the highway is falling. So it's a big deal, and I think my answer continues to be yes. We should do this because there were road closures and things like that, and you had to avoid. That we were telling people to avoid the area. But we did try to reach out to police on the phone, and their PIO was not responding, and that's just really unfortunate. And we do often rely, if it's the police department, we do often rely on them a lot, whatever they put on Twitter and Facebook, and we do go with things without first getting a phone conversation confirmation. So yeah, I don't know how to really.
Do you DM Twitter accounts? Like, are you?
Yeah.
You talking? Yeah.
Yeah.
And do they respond?
The police?
Yeah.
I don't know in this situation. I think whoever tweeted this tweet, very poorly worded tweet, I think was avoiding having to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that we do is, I mean, a lot of it is. You know, if you can't correlate it against eyewitness information, that's obviously the first thing. But the second thing is, what we'll do is we'll do a step back approach. So whatever, you know, if police say they're responding to reports of an active shooting, we're saying police are responding to reports of shots fired. We step it back one, big one, and that has saved our bacon so many times when in actuality it turned out to be one step less than was purported to be. I mean, they're responding off 911 calls, right? Yeah. And so eyewitnesses who tweet and eyewitnesses who call 911, there's not much different. They tend to overstate. There's a lot of hyperbole. And so if you're a first responder, you got to go on the information you have. You cannot downplay that information because it's your job not to. And so they tend to communicate what their call was. The PIOs are listening to the radio and the scanner just like we are. And so you just have to kind of keep that in mind, that stuff does translate over. And as news organizations, we should take a step back and have a little calmer hand until there's more data to be able to make a better call on it.
We were talking about earlier about how often in shooting situations it's always like there's an active shooter and there might be two shooters, and there never is a second shooter. So, well, maybe there are, but
it's very rare.
9 times out of 10 there's not a second shooter. So that's just like people are all calling 911 and like. That
was in our original style guide of breaking news.
Yeah.
We have all those little patterns in our style guide on how to
say
not. It's almost always 2, and it's rarely ever 2. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, yes, in the back there, and then we have one in the front after her. Yeah.
Susan Polton. I'm an independent consultant that lives in Philadelphia. I have a couple of different questions. One, really interested about Facebook rolling out these alerts in larger cities, where without them, you would just kind of have mass chaos. So it seems like it would be really helpful in a larger city, even with all the complications, and if there's a plan to do that. But also for huge breaking events, which we really haven't had, like a 9/11 or a Katrina or a Sandy in the area of sort of our current trust ecosystem. most major cities have an incident command system where they're coordinating among themselves, and there's usually a public information officer assigned to that incident command system. Has there been any efforts that you know of to meet with and update the PIO system in incident command to use these tools in a coordinated fashion? So instead of just working with individual partners in cities, what's the bigger plan for much, much, much bigger situations?
Yeah. So great questions. And I'll just repeat them just in case anyone didn't hear. The first was around rolling out some of these products to bigger cities, which I mentioned that we haven't done yet. And then the second was around coordinated. When there's a number of different government agencies potentially across multiple state lines, how do we think about that broader ecosystem? So to the first point, yes, totally agree with you. So today is small and medium-sized cities, and we are working on hyper-localizing content within big cities so that we can actually expand it to larger cities, but we're not there yet, and we don't really know when we'll be. Probably next year, but probably, right? So local alerts is one that, like you mentioned, we have heard that it's it can be potentially in emergencies, it can be a very important, potentially sometimes life-saving tool. So what we're going ahead and doing is actually, we announced that we're expanding. We're going to open up access to this tool for first responders to any eligible local government first responder page on Facebook by the end of this year. So that will happen independently of our expansion of the Today In tab surface on Facebook. They don't need to go together. It's just that they work better together than they do separately. So the local alerts component is one that we're planning on expanding more quickly because we feel really good about the effect on the communities and their ability to help, to be a really valuable tool in the toolkit to help first responders keep people safe. So yeah. To your second point, yeah, I mean, one of the learnings I've had about working with local governments and first responders is that there is an incredible amount of complexity in the way that they organize. It's different in every community. It's different in every state and region. They set up differently. One common thread is that there tends to be a city government, and within that there'll be 20 to 30 departments, everything from Parks and Rec to emergency management to transportation and others. And yeah, I think what we're planning to do is we're planning on opening up access to any eligible law enforcement, emergency management, city, county government page on Facebook, so long as we validate that they're actually associated with a real government page and aren't an imposter page or something like that. But some of that coordination, that's one of the things that we're not super well suited to help them with. That's kind of their job, right? Is figuring out the right ways to coordinate and organize amongst themselves. Who's the lead public information officer when there's a situation? They often will set up committees that manage during emergencies. We saw that during Florence and during some of the wildfires in California where our tools were used. But there are limitations to the extent to which Facebook can be a helpful tool. And ultimately local governments, first responders, journalists bring important, necessary skills to the table that we can't, that Facebook can't help with. That's not our expertise. That's not what we do. And so that's where the important skills that everybody in this room brings to the table will come into play. So yeah, in terms of helping governments figure out how to coordinate better during a situation like that, I would say we haven't really figured out a way to help them with that at this point, because we would say that's sort of not in our wheelhouse.
There's a question up here, and while you're getting to it, I just have a follow-up. Do you guys train anybody, local government? I mean, obviously, sometimes it's, who knows who's running those accounts. Mm-hmm. Are you guys getting any tips of how to use Facebook?
Yeah. So in terms of these specific tools, all of our partners I mentioned, local journalists, local governments, I mean, we've been in a beta, which means that you're looking at it. I'm training them, we have documentation, we have guidelines, we have it's very detailed in terms of how it works, what you can use it for, what you shouldn't use it for, all of that. And we do webinars and training sessions, and they ask me questions. So, but going forward, if we were to start to scale these things, that wouldn't be possible, right? It's not, we're talking about the country and then, other countries.
Yeah.
And
It's just in the US
Right,
right
exactly.
now, yeah.
So we're working on ways to do this in a more, it's still a high touch way where if they needed the support of customer service basically type support, even though these are totally free tools, by the way, they would have access to it, but we're trying to make as much of that live in the product as possible so that, there's training, there's a help center, there's videos that explain how it works and answer the most common questions. So we're trying to make that live in Facebook, in the product. So there's, because I can't.
We can't be everywhere?
Right, yeah.
God,
Yeah.
come on. Jeez. I'm just kidding. Yes, question right here.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I work at a community newspaper in Colorado. And my question is for you about, you said don't leave your audience hanging. So I just have some questions about breaking news editor's notes. One thing that I find we write on a lot of breaking news is the story will be updated when more information becomes available. But sometimes I think that leaves people hanging more than not writing anything. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Good question.
That is a really good question. Yeah, don't leave them hanging. As soon as you find something, what I meant by that really is as soon as you find out new information, add it to the post, clarify the post if you need to, send out a new alert if you need to. If something's happening and it's over the course of, a few hours, maybe check in every so often and just say, here's where we are, on Twitter or whatever, or do one of those special little boxes here's what we know at this particular time, and just kind of as much as you can, but you're right, check back for more updates is you don't know if there'll ever be any more updates. We're still working on it. Yeah, sure. And especially if other organizations are reporting something, but you don't actually have that, we're acknowledging reports that, this other organization is saying this, but we haven't confirmed this, but we're looking into it, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially with I hate to bring up active shooters again, but God, we have so many of them. What happens in some police agencies is they put out that first tweet about responding to an active shooter, and then they go quiet.
Drives you crazy.
And so in that quiet, you have a tremendous amount of misinformation, right? In the void comes all this misinfo, and especially if it's on a college campus or wherever, people just hear things and then conflate things, and it sort of takes on its own momentum. Then you have the new phenomenon, right, where you can just start tweeting out broadcastify links to the scanner. And people who are actually inside, wherever is locked down, are listening to the scanner and tweeting from it, and they're actually there, so you think they're actually sourcing it themselves, but they're getting it off the scanner. But they've never listened to the scanner before, so you get all this weirdness. So what we've done is, in circumstances like that, we do updates and say we have not seen any evidence of an active shooting that's taking place, but we continue to look. And so we update on a cadence so people know that this probably or may not be anything or be something minor. So that's the way we handle that situation.
It's such a good point too, just to say sometimes if there's no information, just saying that it feels so important. Where we're so used to saying, oh, here's new, but even nothing new can be as important to say like that. I love that.
It's like when you have a tech problem and somebody is looking into it and they don't get back to you, and you just want them to say, we're still looking into it.
Yeah.
Just update me every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I want to know.
I totally love that. There was a question over here. Yes. Whoever was first. The gentleman right there. I think I saw you. In the striped shirt. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm also, my name is Davis. I work at Houston Public Media. I'm running into the same problem of law enforcement increasingly only communicating over social media, which is nice because it's instant and I see it when it comes out. But I've had them call my news director before and say don't call our public affairs office. All of our information goes up on Twitter, and I don't get any follow-ups. They don't respond to my tweets or DMs or anything. And I'm wondering if there's a good way to communicate to audiences this is the information we have. We haven't verified it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't trust it. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that tension a little bit.
I think the way you just said it was really good.
Okay.
This is what we're
Problem
hearing.
solved.
We don't know for sure, but
It's tricky though, right? Yeah. I mean, we have a content format called editor's notes. You may remember from Breaking News. Yeah. So it's just it's smaller font. It's grayed out a little bit. It's written by a person editor. It's signed by the editor's name. So it looks different than regular coverage, right? And that's where we say exactly what you said. But making it look different, it's hard. If you're in a live newscast, that's kind of, how do you make that different? You just kind of couch it, but that's kind of live coverage is couched like that. So people just take it as fact. So I think it is tricky unless you can really kind of demark it somehow. That it's very, very different.
Yeah, it's also important not to maybe amplify something. You know, like we have
Yeah.
all these ways of, just not retweeting with comments something. If you see something, don't do anything. Even though I feel like we all have this urge of like, I saw it, it's there, like I got it, and it makes us look good and that we're on it. But if it turns out to be false, that's obviously hugely embarrassing. Just because the police department tweets something doesn't mean it's accurate. But I think that is like a gut check in all of us, because certainly if it's from the police, a little check mark, or it's on a Facebook page and it looks verified, we want to share that, and that is a different gut check than something else. So
I think one of the lines I had was like, don't cause undue harm or alarm. And like, think about those two, harm and alarm, like when you're reporting something that you don't know for sure.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more question? Yes, Joan.
Forgive me if you've addressed this and I missed it, but I'm really intrigued by some of your discussion on active shooter. Do you think there is a difference between what law enforcement means when they say active shooter and what the audience hears when they hear active shooter?
Yeah, I wrote a whole blog post about it a couple months ago. There's an actual definition in law enforcement about what it means. It's someone who's actively shooting at people. And it's not a domestic, it's not isolated in a house. It's in an area, it's in a public area. And so, but that's, shots fired in a public area could be translated by police as they're responding to an active shooter call. And so the language gets in the tweet and then it just spreads throughout news organizations. We specifically downplay that as much as we can and say shots fired or reports of shots fired, simply because in people's minds, they kind of take the same meaning. They mean that a bunch of people are being shot right now, is what people translate it to mean, which is kind of the same definition the cops use. But for some reason, and media is much to blame for making that term one that everyone just defaults to. And so I would just encourage everybody to always step back and not use the term, even if police use it, until you actually know it is the definition of the term.
I think we're all out of time, but I just want to thank our panelists for being here today and for everyone for their questions. They'll hang out here, come and chat with us. Thank you again.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, thanks.
Going to be here. I didn't see like your usual.
Hey. Good.